Hi everyone, and welcome to the latest in Bupa's Inside Health series. Today's topic is understanding anxiety, where we'll get to know more about the causes and symptoms, how to manage it as efficiently as possible, and how to support others who are experiencing it as well. Unfortunately, 1 in 6 people report experiencing mental health problems in any given week in England, with anxiety being one of the most common causes. And it can take many forms, and it can start for many different reasons, from stress at work to personal relationships. It can arise out of the blue with little warning or explanation, and it can be short-term or long-term. And it's because of all of this that it can be difficult to understand and know how to manage it for yourself or for others. So today we're going to try and provide that help and look at ways we can manage anxiety as well as reduce its impact on our day-to-day. To help us explore those topics, I'm joined by a brilliant guest in Joshua Fletcher, otherwise known on Instagram as Anxiety Josh. He's a psychotherapist, is a best-selling author and a public speaker, and has been very open about his own personal experiences of anxiety. And that's what encouraged him to become an expert in the field in order to help others. So we'll be getting his personal and professional experience, as well as getting his top tips on coping with anxiety. We'll also be putting some of your questions to Josh, so please do send them in on the chat. Okay, Josh, thank you so much for joining us. I think first off, let's get started with your own personal experiences of anxiety. When did you first realise that anxiety was impacting you?
I remember the exact moment anxiety took over my life. I was going through a very stressful time. I was in my young 20s. I've always been a bit of a worrier. You know, as a kid, I'd worry about things, and yeah, it was a bit of a worrier, but it transcended into heavy anxiety. The time one morning I was in work, I was going through something very stressful. I was a primary carer for my brother. Just finished university, working in a pupil referral unit, very stressed, and it all changed one morning when I experienced intense panic and dissociation, scary intrusive thoughts, and then I developed agoraphobia. It flipped on a coin in one morning, and I knew I was stressed, and I knew I was always a worrier, but this was a kind of different anxiety to what I now know was an anxiety disorder. But I didn't even know at the time what was going on. I just thought I'd broken my brain or something. You know, there's a voice in my head that was saying, "You've finally done it, Josh." And I remember it started then, and eventually finding the right help and the right education on it helped me to get to a really good place now. So and inspired me to become a therapist.
You mentioned 2 words there, but might not be familiar to people. So dissociation and agoraphobia. Can you, I guess, paint a bit of a picture as to what that experience looked like for you?
Yeah, so dissociation is a really common symptom, but it was never explained to me. And I think when you don't understand when something's happening with any symptom of anxiety, dissociation was at the time scary for me. It's also called derealization or depersonalization. So for some people, they might not feel like they're in the room, or the room might feel bigger or smaller. Maybe their hands look far away or close, or maybe their hands don't feel like theirs. For me, I described it as being suddenly feeling like I was in the Matrix. People's faces look like clay, and yeah, it was very strange. If it happens now, it doesn't happen very often, but if it happens now, I know what it is. It's okay. It's usually, my body and mind saying, "You're stressed, go easy." But when I didn't know what it was, alongside the other symptoms like palpitating heart and dizziness, lightheadedness, sensory issues, all of them. When I didn't know, I found it very scary. I used to add to that fear. And agoraphobia is the fear of straying too far away from your safe zone. So obviously the stereotype of agoraphobia is they don't leave the house. I didn't leave the house, but also when I could leave the house, I'd only go to certain designated safe zones, whether it was work or certain radius from my house, or when I managed to get in the car, I could drive to the next town, but wouldn't go further than that. In many ways. And if you're agoraphobic, it's usually you might avoid going to places because you're afraid that you'll overwhelm yourself. And I've experienced a lot of that.
How long were you experiencing symptoms before you actually reached out to get some help?
I was experiencing them for about 6 months and didn't leave the house for
Really?
6 months.
Wow.
Yeah,
Really?
and I was quite like a confident person as well. It's really struck me from nowhere, and it was now I know it was because of accumulated stress. But for 6 months to find what was up with me, what I now know and what I call disordered anxiety. So it was very difficult to explain to my doctor or loved ones why I felt the way I did, and I couldn't quite put it into words. I was a bit confused, and that's when I discovered psychoeducation. And I love psychoeducation. It's the cornerstone of my practice, and it's the cornerstone of my recovery, and what I do as a job now is learning what was happening in my brain, learning I wasn't going crazy, learning that other people have this and you can recover. And I finally had hope after 6 months, and with that hope and education, I was willing and to put in the hard work of, getting my life back on track. I don't regret having an anxiety disorder. It's not something that I now see that I should have fixed. I've learned more from it and grown as a person since experiencing it. And, if you're anxious and, watching at home, know that, you can always get to a better place.
I think for anybody who suffers with anxiety, hearing that will give them huge amounts of hope that actually, whilst there will be times that are not pleasant and you won't wish for, it may actually, some good can come out of it.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's about, I often get asked, like, how do I turn off anxiety? It's like, no, you can't. Anxiety is okay. But a lot of people who struggle with anxiety have, what Dr. Claire Weeks called it, you've got first fear, primary fear, initial fear, and then you've got secondary fear. And that's when you start to go into disordered anxiety territory. So I think, well, at least everyone has a panic attack in their lifetime, but then it passes and they get on with stuff. But for some people, that panic attack can be so frightening that they build their life around it. Secondary fear. Same with intrusive thoughts. A lot of people get intrusive thoughts, but some people, the brain can latch on to that. And so it creates secondary fear, secondary behaviors. My aim is to kind of, switch off the secondary fear and allow yourself to have anxiety, but not allow it to be the center of your life. Because when you start to build your life around anxiety, it becomes important both to you personally and to your anxious brain, and you can end up in loops. Anyone who struggles with anxiety will tell you this is cyclical, it's in a loop, and it's consuming. And what I aim to do is, try and guide people off the hamster wheel, come out of the loop, and get on with your life.
So you went through this 6-month period where you didn't leave the home or barely left the home. You had this agoraphobia. So was it at the 6-month point that the word anxiety was first presented to you, or did you think that was going on? Did you have an inkling? And was it just anxiety at first, or was it more complex than that from the beginning?
Didn't even enter my mind that it was anxiety.
Really?
I thought something was wrong. Don't get me wrong, I felt fearful and worried, but I didn't really use the word anxiety. It was only until a friend said, I explained to them everything, what was going on, and she said, "Oh yeah, it sounds like you got anxiety." And something so simple, I was like, "What?" So yeah, those symptoms, racing thoughts. I'm like, yeah, you've got anxiety, as opposed to feeling anxious. It was like, yeah, I'm in. It feels like I don't feel like my old self. I miss my old self. I'm waking up every morning searching for my old self. And then so I framed it like, I've got anxiety. What can I do to kind of overcome this? And again, that's what led me to psychoeducation and just learning about what's happening in my brain, learning what I'm doing that's keeping it there. I didn't realize I was doing a lot that was keeping it there. And once I learned that, I got to a much better place.
I'm smiling a lot there and nodding a lot there because I had a similar but very different experience myself. I also have anxiety. And you'd think as a doctor that I'd be able to pinpoint it much more easily, that I'd be able to spot it, but I didn't. So I was getting very much physical symptoms in my body. Psychologically, I kind of felt I was coping. I was working in A&E and it was fine, but I was getting episodes of severe palpitations, and waking in the night with pain in my chest, which was esophageal spasm. So I very much went down the medical route. I was going for ECGs all the time, sort of doing my own paperwork. Don't tell anyone. And just turning up for ECGs, desperately trying to catch an episode to see what arrhythmia I had. And I'd had an endoscopy and, all the tests done. And it was a friend of mine. I was chatting to a friend, talking about these symptoms. And I was saying, I think there's something wrong with my heart. And she said, well, when do you get it? Do you get it when you're in the gym? I've always been an athlete. No, that's a funny thing. Whenever I'm exercising, I feel great. Do you get it when you're riding your bike? Dangerous roads of London? No. When do you get it? Or at night or in the quiet moments? And she said, it sounds like anxiety. And in that moment, the penny dropped. Literally, the penny dropped. And I was like, you're right. And I knew she was right. And then, was able to then start finding ways to manage it. But yeah, that's the difficult thing, I think, for a lot of people, is that the symptoms can vary so much from person to person. And I think often as well, we can be quite stoic and we think things are normal. So for yourself, it was the panic attack. But for other people, it can be more subtle, can't it? And it can be going on for a long time. How can people identify and start to make that connection if they don't have good friends like us who help us spot it, that it is actually anxiety?
I love to conceptualize anxiety as a Woolworths pick and mix. So in the first aisle, you've got your strawberry laces, and they're your thoughts. So you're struggling with anxiety when all your thoughts begin with what if. It's always what if, and it's never a fun what if either. It's like a what if insert catastrophe. It's also anxiety when it's I should. So if you're someone with productivity anxiety and esteem issues, you've got endless to-do lists, and you only praise yourself when you do things you value yourself on your output and not the effort and intention. You feel guilty for stopping. That's a form of anxiety, productivity anxiety. So thoughts that begin with I should, you shouldn't have to do that. And then I can't, people that just avoid, maybe because they're scared, overwhelmed. And that's in your first, it's not a tasty pick and mix, is it? But stay in there. So they're the thoughts, and that's just one facet. In the flump section, you've got physical sensations. So like you said, Zoe, you've got chest pain's a big one, often to do with, muscle tension, palpitations, dizziness, lightheadedness. The physical symptoms are so numerous. I had jaw pain, eye pain, headaches, scalp tension, things like muscle twitches, face twitching, loads. Honestly, I wrote a list down once. I got to 130. Yeah. But the most obvious ones are, like palpitations, feeling derealized, detached, what I meant before, and aches and pains and things like that. And in the third section, where the chocolate mice are in, you've got feelings. So some people with anxiety, may have just a sense of doom, nervousness, a sense of negative anticipation, trepidation. I think Brené Brown says a sense of foreboding. Some people just feel terror, particularly those with panic. And you've got anxiety when you've picked through the pick and mix, and all these are kind of ticking the boxes. It's also helpful to conceptualize how your anxiety presents, because it's not going to be the same as the person sat next to you, although it may share similarities. And if that's dictating most of your day and getting in the way of living your life, then it's a sure bet that you're struggling with some kind of anxiety problem.
So, Josh, if you were to give one tip to someone who'd been diagnosed with anxiety that could really help them, what would it be?
I think the first thing you should do is identify what type of anxiety you have. Anxiety covers a huge umbrella of terms. So you might have GAD, you might have panic disorder, you might have OCD, health anxiety. Find out what type it is, because sometimes the approach is different dependent on what type of anxiety is you're experiencing. I think that's really important. And then, once you can then learn more about what's recommended to deal with it. Okay. I think that's really important.
Thanks for sharing that story, Josh. I think that a lot of people will be able to relate to that, and just really informative and inspiring as well. We've had a couple of questions in already about your experience with anxiety. One of our viewers has asked, were you worried about the stigma of anxiety?
I was initially. I was surprised by how I was lucky to be surrounded by people who were open, compassionate, and loving, but I realized that I'm very lucky to be in that situation. Some people may be surrounded by people who are perhaps a little less understanding, particularly if you're around the pull yourself together crowd and all that stuff, and the emotionally conservative crowd, which are, I just don't worry about problems. Why are you worrying? And people say that because they don't quite understand, and this is why we do things like this, so people can understand. But I wasn't worried about the stigma. That's why I put myself on a public platform. I really, really don't see it as it being stigmatized. And I think when you see more kind of lanky Mancunians walking around talking about it, I think it'll go a little way to addressing that it shouldn't be something that should have a stigma.
Okay, that's great. The second question that we had is, how do we overcome the misconceptions about someone who is struggling with anxiety? I'm a 63-year-old man and retired, and I think people believe anxiety isn't a thing for men or for older people.
No, anxiety affects everyone, no matter how old you are, whatever your gender is, whatever. If you're human, you will experience anxiety. Some people, it might just be a kind of conventional expected anxiety. We all have a threat response in our brain. If you have a threat response in your brain, you're more than likely going to experience anxiety. I would challenge the kind of beliefs around that about kind of, well, if I'm at this age, I shouldn't be having anxiety now. No. And I'm a therapist. I've worked with people of all ages. And it doesn't make you any weaker, or doesn't make you, it doesn't make you weak to show your vulnerability. If anything, I see it as courage. You're doing something that is challenging, and fair play to you. No matter what your age, though, you can always talk about it.
Okay, let's move on to the next bit, which is talking about, let's define anxiety and a bit of the terminology and understanding more what it is. So the word anxiety is thrown about quite a bit, but is there one catch-all definition for all the different types of anxiety?
Yeah, your anxiety is your brain's threat response, but the threat is subjective to the individual. So if you've got social anxiety, the threat is people's judgment, maybe rejection. If you struggle with panic attacks, then the panic attack itself might be the threat. If you struggle with many worries, like people with GAD do, generalized anxiety, the threat is anything that the cognitive brain wants to suggest. What if that's the problem? What if that's the problem? What if that's the problem? If it's many things. Social anxiety is people's opinions, performance anxiety, productivity anxiety. The threat is not feeling good enough. It doesn't matter what the threat is. Anxiety is your threat response. And when we get stressed, when we don't understand it, and when we don't address any of the issues there, it can start to fire off a lot, or even start misfiring. And that's when we end up with chronic anxiety.
So how do we differentiate then? Where is the line between feeling anxious, which we all will in some circumstances, faced with something that is life-threatening, we'll feel anxious for sure, and anxiety as a disorder?
And feeling anxious becomes an anxiety disorder when it becomes chronic and excessive, when you start to feel like you don't feel like your old self, when you start to feel anxious in incongruous situations. I'm in the supermarket, I'm out for a meal, I'm watching the football. Why do I feel anxious? That's when you know that your threat response is misfiring. And if that continues over weeks and months, then it's a pretty safe bet to assume that you might be in anxiety disorder territory.
Okay, that's really helpful. There are lots of different types of anxiety disorders. What are some of the common ones?
The most common in this country is generalized anxiety disorder, which is a bit of like a chicken and the egg scenario. Right. Your threat response is firing off, so your thinking brain's trying to suggest potential threats and reasons. These are the people that get like, what ifs? What if that goes wrong? Or if that goes wrong? What if this catastrophe happens? Another common one is panic disorder, where things get very overwhelming. We have a panic attack, and then we build our lives around not experiencing that overwhelming anxiety because we believe we can't cope with it.
So it's a sort of fear of the panic attack itself that changes your behaviours.
Yes, because it's very frightening if you have a panic attack, and you can understand why people wouldn't want to experience it again. But with panic disorder, the way out is learning that and believing that you can cope with it, because you can. You've got obsessive compulsive disorder, which is often characterized by intrusive thoughts and compulsive safety behaviors to try to address the uncertainty around those intrusive thoughts.
How irritating is it when people say someone's got a bit of OCD because they want things very neat and tidy? Is that annoying?
I mean, I'm an advocate in the OCD community as someone who's had OCD myself. I don't really get annoyed at that because it's not personal. I understand it's frustrating when people misuse it. It's not, OCD is not an adjective, but at the same time, I'm not going to kick off when someone's misusing it. They don't know. People are as good as what they know. And by doing things like this and educating people, like, no, it's just because your DVDs are in order and your kitchen's tidy and you're fastidious and obsessive over cleaning doesn't mean you have OCD.
And then, so those are some of the common ones. So we've got generalised anxiety disorder, GAD, and what about social anxiety? That's another common one.
Social anxiety is a really common one. You've got social anxiety when you're ruminating about an event where you're required to be in front of people, sometimes weeks before the event. During the event, you're hyper-focused on how you're coming across. Then after the event, you might be in the shower ruminating, or did I offend that someone? Did I come across okay? Was I too anxious, etc.? It can be quite complex, social anxiety, because that threat response can be conditioned. So you might be socially anxious because your esteem's low. Maybe you've gone through some rough patches when you were younger. Maybe you grew up in a household where you had to people please to feel safe. It depends on social anxiety, but it's very common.
And then talking about panic attacks, if that's a phrase that we should use, or sort of severe anxiety episodes, how would you know if you were having one?
It's a panic attack because you suddenly feel a sense that something awful is going to happen. You feel almost convinced. Usually occurs in situations that are safe, which adds to the fear, because you're like, well, I can't see any danger. I can't identify the danger. And then you're wondering why your heart's rapidly beating. You have this sense to run away, to find safety, the scary racing what ifs. Most panic attacks come with, what if I go crazy? What if I collapse? What if I have a heart attack? What if I humiliate myself? Along with the physical symptoms and along with feelings of terror. It's a misinterpretation and confusion around the huge adrenaline dump that you've had. You don't understand why, but with almost any person who has their first panic attack, it doesn't really come from nowhere. It's usually been building for a few weeks or sometimes months. Is
it just that sort of like the straw that broke the camel's back in that moment? It's that one extra thing that means you can't cope.
Yeah. Interestingly as well, you can have panic attacks in response to positive stress. So I've seen clients where they're like, I've got nothing to worry about. I've just got married. I've had my first child. We've moved house. Everything looks wonderful. I'm like, all stressful, positive stress.
Yeah.
But job promotions are stressful. You just don't realize. I know they're good things, but it all goes and adds to the stress joke.
Yeah, the brain doesn't necessarily differentiate between negative and positive. It's interesting. And then I guess the severity. So there are these different types of disorders, but the severity can be different from one person to the next, can't it?
Yeah, it depends, and it's not a badge of honor if someone that doesn't experience anxiety. People have their own challenges and hurdles, and if anxiety is yours, that's okay. That's your hurdle. Own it. I don't own mine. I do pretty well now, but I still get anxious now and then. Don't compare yourself. It's not a form of weakness. It's just your hurdle, and everyone has their own.
So, are you saying then that anxiety can't be fixed?
You don't fix anxiety, but you do stop secondary fear and the misinterpretation of it. You can't remove the amygdala from your brain, but you can stop it from misfiring. So anxiety is a very healthy response. we'd all be dead without it.
Yeah.
You know, if we had no sense of doubt and doubt
Just
mechanism.
walk off the end of a cliff.
Walk off the end of a cliff, be reckless. You wouldn't even consider the danger of situations.
Mm-hmm.
You need anxiety. It also means you care, and it can be performance enhancing. However, when that threat response that's predominantly is anxiety is misfiring, yeah, you can definitely overcome a misfiring threat response, and that's what I try to say to people.
Okay, great. We've had a few more questions in that relate to this specific topic. The first one is there such a thing as high-functioning anxiety? I've seen a lot about it and recognised some of the symptoms in myself, so I'm wondering if I should get some treatment.
I mean, when people say they have high-functioning anxiety, usually what they mean is I can get my job done, I can do all my chores, I can do things at home, but it's all done with this sense of anxiety. I think it's helpful to separate it. So first of all, well done. You're managing to get things done despite being anxious. I think that's really admirable. But separate them like, okay, there's an anxiety issue here. For some people with high-functioning anxiety, it's because they don't know how to stop. They find it difficult to stop. Maybe they feel guilt and shame. Maybe they've got productivity anxiety. Maybe there's just something that's unsaid. I think it's really important that rather than say, I've got high-functioning anxiety, it's a thing, it's what's making you anxious. And give yourself credit for getting stuff done, but explore what your anxiety is. I personally don't really use that term, but that's my preference.
I'm someone who's sat here nodding and smiling. I think people might ask the question then, well, if somebody has anxiety, but actually they're thriving despite it, why does it matter? And I think probably somebody who maybe fits into that category myself, I think it matters because having anxiety, even if you're doing okay, potentially it is robbing you of joy and of living your life the best way that you can. You might be, quashing your feelings, quashing your emotions, and therefore not getting everything out of life.
Yeah, there's no point going to a museum when all you're doing is sprinting around it and leaving. The joy is in stopping, reflecting. Oh, look, there's the Mona Lisa. That's nice.
Yeah.
Not just to tick it off and say that you've done it.
Yeah.
Also, it's not sustainable to be in fifth gear constantly because that leads to burnout town.
Yeah.
It's not a town you want to visit.
Okay, great advice there. Next one, I'm concerned about OCD. How do I get diagnosed?
If you're concerned about OCD, obviously, first of all, go to your doctor, and then they should signpost you to a clinical psychologist who can assess you for OCD.
Okay.
And they'll ask you, if you do struggle with OCD, you might probably struggle with intrusive thoughts. Don't be afraid to share them with an OCD specialist because they've heard them all, no matter how taboo they are.
Great. And the next one is, I worry a lot about health issues and what might happen to my health. How can I overcome this health anxiety?
It's okay to worry about your health. I think it's a very normal thing to do, a very human thing. When it becomes chronic and excessive, when it overlaps into obsessive and compulsive territory, is when you kind of need help with health anxiety. I think it's classed now under a branch of OCD. Extreme health anxiety because of the obsessive compulsive nature of it, and trying to find the line between what's a healthy amount of checking and looking after yourself and what's becoming consuming and excessive.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that. We've spoken a lot about the meaning of anxiety, breaking it up into the different types of anxiety disorders. We've spoken a lot about your experience, and I think we've spoken about how important it is to get the help that you need in order to live with anxiety and not fix it. I'm still a bit disappointed that I can't fix it, but anyway, there we go. So I think you said one of the big turning points for you was feeling seen.
Feeling seen. I think it's such a lovely feeling when I read in certain books or when a therapist, you say all these things and they're like, yeah, that's a thing. That's not you. It's not, because anxiety is very isolating. When you realize that a lot of people out there actually probably experience anxiety the same as you, as well as different to you, but the same as you as well. I think it's really important. Feeling seen helps you to feel empowered. It helps you to feel like you're a part of something and you're not this anomaly that has no hope.
So bearing that in mind then, that this feeling seen has really helped you and probably can help a lot of people. How would you support people to, or advise people to start being more open about their own anxiety, to talking to their loved ones about it? You know, maybe even going a step further like you have. It might not be for everybody, but talking about it on your public platforms. I know, again, you know, for me personally, the first time I shared on This Morning, I was doing an item on This Morning, and I said, I have anxiety. You know, I've taken medication, I've had therapy, and there are times in my life when it's more difficult and challenging, and other times when I manage. And I remember that moment, I felt so empowered afterwards. And I realised in that moment, people aren't going to judge me negatively for having anxiety. And if anything, people will judge me and regard me more highly that I have this, yet I do manage to do what I do. And I think, and people will relate to me more. But how do you get people to start having those conversations when I think a lot of people, the reality is, do still, whether there is stigma or not, or what level of stigma there is, they worry that they'll be perceived negatively?
I think do what you did and embrace humility and see it as a strength.
Just be brave to take that first step and just talk about it.
Yeah, it's freeing. Also own it. I think a lot of people think that when they talk about these things publicly, you can own it. Like I think I do. Like, yeah, you know, I'll be out with some of my guy mates and they'll be like, you all right? I'm like, struggling a bit with anxiety and dissociation, but I'll be all right in a minute. And they're like, all right, cool.
Yeah.
Anything you need? No.
Yeah, let us know what we can do to help, and then crack on.
Just own it. Like no one cares, you know. Whereas it doesn't.
Yeah.
It depends. You judge it and who you trust to share it with. It doesn't have to be a grand proscenium arch reveal where you come in from the ceiling on a zip line and be like, I have anxiety and depression. You don't have to do that.
Nothing wrong with flying in from the ceilings on zip lines, I'll tell you though.
I mean, I would like that, but
yeah.
It doesn't have to be this big grand announcement, but you can do it in subtle ways. So if you see things in the media or social media and stuff, you can say, like, you know, other people have done it. Like, I know someone's like, see this person here talking about this. I struggle with this. Yeah. All right. Okay. Subtle. It doesn't have to be this big, dramatic, intense thing. But yeah, no matter how you communicate that, the fact that you're willing to try, it takes courage.
And you know, another thing that people might experience, if people start opening up and sharing that they have anxiety with the people that are close to them, there'll be a number of people that will turn straight back round and say, me too.
Absolutely.
So what if you're trying to support a loved one who has anxiety and anxiety disorder, or maybe doesn't know if they do, but you suspect it? How can you open up those conversations?
You can open up those conversations by doing a bit of reading and learning yourself. It's really lovely. I did a course a few years ago, and it was really nice that someone brought their partner. I was like, you know, you're both anxious. And like, no, my partner isn't, but he wants to learn.
Nice.
I love that. You know,
Nice.
I think it's really nice. Like, if you want to step into that person's frame of reference and help them, then, you know, develop a bit of empathy for what they're going through. You'll never fully understand, but even polishing up on the terminology can be really helpful. And that can be empowering. Putting names to things as well. And reminding, particularly if they're anxious, your memory kind of goes out the window when you're anxious. So being that reminder of, like, maybe you've been here before, you've done this, I've seen you get through this before. Just learning about it, being encouraging, trying not to put people down. Saw a really funny meme the other day. It was like, how to help someone with a panic attack. Step 1, shout at them. And then that was the end of it. And I just found it very amusing. And it's actually very real for some people. I think it's kind of mocking that, you know, you being anxious is making me anxious. Try to keep that empathy and support, and also belief. Don't ever pity. So no one wants to feel pity. That convey that encouragement and belief in someone, and they'll lap it up.
And I think I'd add to that, if your concern is that by bringing it up and raising the topic with that person that you care about might make it worse, or might make them shy away from the conversation, or might do some harm in some way, don't worry about that. You know, even if you don't get it perfect, just letting that person know that you're there for them. It's always better to say something than say nothing at all.
Yeah, or just being there. Yeah, just even being that presence, I find like it can be okay. Knowing, communicating something as opposed to saying sometimes. Being there is communication, but...
Is there a phrase, like one safe phrase or question that you could give to people to open up a conversation about a loved one that they think might be struggling?
That's a good question. Be inquisitive. So no matter how their anxiety presents, ask about it. Be curious. And that conveys way more than, kind of one thing. And it's really nice when someone does that, when they're curious about your world, no matter how kind of dark and troubling it is, when someone shows curiosity, it's a beautiful thing. Yeah. And I think, you can do that.
Love that. It's like a little light, isn't it? Right, some really nice advice there. Practical way to get the conversation started. Couple more questions come in on the chat. So, I'm really worried about opening up to my manager about my anxiety. Can Josh offer any advice on conversations at work?
So I'd love to be able to sit here and be like, it depends on your manager. I live in the real world. Some managers are fantastic. And in your workplace, find if there's like a head of wellness or someone who's responsible for that, and go to them. If it is your manager and they're willing to listen, then great, do that. I know loads of really good managers in organizations that were very compassionate, very empathetic, very supportive. But also, some people ask me saying like, if I tell my boss this, that's my career subject. And we do live in that world. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't exist.
That may well be the reality for some people.
Yeah. And so therefore I use your intuition. But if you're asking the question, how can I tell my manager because I feel like I'm willing to?
Yeah.
Then ask to sit down, have a private conversation, and just tell them a bit about how you're feeling at the moment and stuff, and maybe suggest things how they can support you. And if they're a good manager, they will listen and come back to you with ways they can support you.
And they should. It's the same if this was a physical health problem. I don't know. You were having some back pain issues and you needed a bit of support at work, whether it was that work could support you by allowing you to work from home a bit more, or getting you a particular type of chair. We'd often feel much more comfortable having those conversations. And it's no different really, is it? You're having an issue with your health. It happens to be mental health rather than physical health. I think especially if you're going to your manager with some suggestions for what they can do to help you, whether that is coming in slightly later in the mornings, working the first hour from home so you miss rush hour traffic, because that's something that really you struggle with. So going with some suggestions as well. So you're sort of not saying, I've got this problem and I'm handing it to you. You say, this is how you can help me.
Definitely. And depending on what the organisation you're in, try and look at it through that way. And they should be accommodating, because ultimately, even from a business perspective, people don't want you off poorly and stuff. They want to. Exactly. That's a really cynical, measurable view. But if you're a very human, empathetic manager as well, they want you to be well. They want your workforce to be well. It's good management.
Yeah. But finding the right person, that's a really key, isn't it?
I can think of bosses where I wouldn't have told.
Yeah.
And actually I had some really good bosses that were lovely.
Well, me too. And, I'm a doctor. I've worked in the NHS most of my life, but there are some times when I think I would have struggled to have shared with that person if I'd been struggling. Next question. My teenage daughter has got exams this year, and I think she has anxiety symptoms that are getting worse. How can I get her to open up and get some help?
She's anxious about her exams. Just tell her, you're not defined by her exams. If you're a parent who's quite enthusiastic about your kid getting good grades, I'd maybe reflect on, turn it down a notch, if the pressure's already there. I would remind your daughter that, her value is based on not just condensed into a piece of paper that she can open out of an envelope. I'm sure she has many beautiful facets to herself, characteristics and attributes. I absolutely bombed my exams. No, I got an A, a B, 2 C's, a D, 2 fails. But it doesn't mean anything.
Do you know what? I bombed my A-levels as well.
Did you?
And it didn't stop me.
You could spell fudge with my A-levels.
Well, one of mine was an E. So anyway, it wasn't my A-level results that got me into medical school. So I think, there's something about, it's not the end of the world.
Honestly, my advice, what my mum told me is that it's okay to be a bit anxious. Anxiety is performance enhancing to an extent.
Yeah.
You're anxious because you care.
Yeah.
And I think just try your best. My mum just said, I don't care what you get, just try your best, and trying your best is with anxiety too. So you'll sit there, your hand might be shaking and, turn over your paper and it's deafeningly silent.
Yeah.
And the invigilator walking up and down, it's a bit intense. It's okay.
Well, then your brain can just do that thing, can't it, where you think, I almost can't read a sentence because of the anxiety.
That's normal, yeah. First 5 minutes, I have to reread the question 100 times, still don't get it. Yeah. It's okay. You've got this. It's okay to be anxious, I'd say.
Okay. And if she feels like her daughter really does need more professional help, what's the first port of call there, do you think?
A nice space for her to talk about the worries. Exam time, particularly for younger people, is very stressful. Also, the other things that come with that at that time of your life. It's not only exams, but there's identity, formative years, hormonal things happening. There's loads. The stress jug in people in that age is enormous, and maybe a space for her to talk, maybe a counsellor, maybe there's a school counsellor, a college counsellor that should be available there, and allowing her to allow herself to permission to stop and stuff. Because usually people are worried about exams or revise until the sun comes up, and I'm
you need your sleep.
Your
brain consolidates those memories when you sleep. So, well, I guess we're going to move on to now top tips for managing anxiety as well. So I'm sure there'll be lots of sort of lifestyle tips that will come up in this piece that maybe this mother can support her daughter with as well. So managing anxiety, we want to leave our viewers with some sort of tangible takeaways from today. Let's start with prevention. Can we be proactive in managing our anxiety from a prevention point of view?
Yeah, proactive as opposed to reactive. Always use the stress jug analogy. It's not mine, but I like it. Be aware of your stress jug, what's going in it. You can't get rid of everything, so if you're a perfectionist, they're like, how do I get rid of everything in it? Like,
now, everybody might not know about the stress jug, so do elaborate, because I think it's a really helpful analogy.
Imagine a jug or a receptacle of your choice. It's a metaphor to represent your ability to tolerate stress. Thanks to genetics, your stress jug might be smaller than your friend's. I know I've got a friend, Callum, whose stress jug is enormous, and the apocalypse could be happening and he doesn't care, whereas I get really worried if I've not put the bins out because my stress jug can be quite high. Just be mindful of what's in it, so it could be everyday worries, money worries, financial worries, relationship worries. There could be things in your stress jug from a long time ago. Grief, maybe you lost something not processed, a relationship that you've lost, pet loss. Maybe there's some old friction with parents and extended family, you don't know. That goes in there too. Then you could add all the scary anxiety and anxiety disorder symptoms in there, the fear of fear, anxiety itself, the practicalities of work, shame, guilt, all goes into the stress jug. To prevent that, we do things trying to empty it. So nervous system calming things like meditation, mindfulness, eating well, nourishing yourself. But when I say well, don't go overkill with it. There's nothing more boring than, for me, a salad. I get quite sad, but obviously there's balance. So I want to nourish myself, but also I want to enjoy food. Things like exercise. That most people know things that are good for them. But make sure there's a balance in there. And you can do things to empty the stress jug. If there's grief, speak to someone about it. Grief counsellor or a friend, trusted loved one. If you're worried about little things, maybe plan out a map to try and get out there and emptying as much as you can. The mistake people make is that the stress jug overflows, that threat response fires off, they wonder why they're having panic attacks, and then they try all the techniques. It doesn't work.
We haven't really spoken about medication, but this is sometimes I use this analogy of I tend to talk about a bath, but same thing.
Receptacle is a bath.
Yeah, well, you can take out the plug and drain some of those stress things away with these things like meditation, etc. But this is where I use this as a way to talk about how medication can help. And I think if we're using the jug as the analogy, the way I see medication being right for some people is that it's going to maybe take some time to address the things that have filled up the jug or the things that are going to empty the jug. So medication almost gives you temporarily, while you're taking it, a slightly bigger jug. So it gives you a bit of time to manage these things, to deal with the overflowing. And that's why, usually we recommend that if you are going to take something like an SSRI for anxiety, you should look to be on it for at least 6 months to give yourself that extra bit of jug height. But then once things are really well managed, because you've sorted out all these strategies, that's when it is safe to gradually think about removing that extra, the bumpers on the jug sort of thing.
Absolutely, yeah. There's no shame if you need to take medication for things. People's brains are different, but also, always chat to your doctor and psychiatrist and things, because you know your body better than anyone else's. So if you feel like something's not working after a while, keep talking about it. It's not a you thing. I hear great stories of people on medication that's been really helpful for them, but also you hear things where actually it's not working for me.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to talk to your doctor and psychiatrist.
Absolutely. I took medication for anxiety and it really did help me. But then a couple of years later, when I felt ready to stop, it took me about a year to come off them. It was sort of up and down because it can be tricky. So I think as long as people have that knowledge and are informed, it can be good. What about natural remedies? So there are many products out there that are trying to sell to you as a natural remedy for anxiety. And whilst I'm all about a cup of chamomile tea, won't do you any harm, why not?
I like a cup of chamomile.
What do you think about natural remedies?
Do things to de-stress, but don't do it as a way to get rid of anxiety, because that has the opposite effect. I've done them all. I cut out gluten for 6 months. I starved myself with pizza to try and get rid of the feeling I had, and it was nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
For me, it's the relationship with it. I love a chamomile tea. I like relaxing things. I do these things as preventative. If you're doing these things as a reaction to an overfilling jug, that's an anxiety compulsion and a safety behavior, and it signals to the brain that anxiety is dangerous. So yeah, enjoy that. But if you, in my opinion, when I see all these things, I exist on social media, so I'm surrounded by it. I get people asking me all the time to promote their products about it, stuff. I was like, I don't, because it doesn't align with my belief on how you overcome anxiety. And so every time I see, anxiety reducing things, take it with a pinch of salt. I would say that.
Yeah.
There's always a new one every year as well. Last year was ashwagandha. The year before was chamomile. The year before, I don't know what next year it'll be. I don't know, mint. I don't know.
So whilst these things, they're not, these teas, they're not going to do you any harm, and they might help you alleviate your stress, we shouldn't be seeing them as an anxiety buster, because we're not trying to bust our anxiety. We're trying to find ways to live with it.
Yeah. So I'll have a nice herbal tea at the end. If I'm feeling stressed and I've got a choice between a caffeinated tea and a nice chamomile, I'm going to have the chamomile tea and relax and smell it and be mindful and enjoy it. Yeah. I'm not doing shots of chamomile tea and checking to see if my anxiety's gone, which some people do.
Yeah. And then therapy. So you're an advocate of therapy, you're a therapist. What types of therapy can help with anxiety? And do people always need to see a professional, or can they do self-guided therapy?
Therapists are different, and a lot of therapists are very proud and an advocate of their own modality they've trained in. So modality is the type of therapy that people have learned in. I'm trained in humanistic and cognitive behavioral therapy, which I love, and often each modality has their own theory about where anxiety comes from.
Right.
I'm very passionate about my modality in the sense that anxiety disorders exist because of a misfiring threat response and a lot of obvious things. But depending on the therapy that you get, can affect the approach to which the therapist tries to address it. So some people put off therapy because some therapists are nosy. We are. But like, some people might put him off because they might see a therapist who immediately wants to talk about mum and dad and horrible things from childhood.
Yeah.
I don't do that, and most cognitive behavioral therapists don't. Some people want to explore trauma. Some people want to explore many things, relationships with people around you. So my advice is, if you'd like to see therapy, I love therapy, ask the therapist how they work.
Right.
And you're allowed to, and a good therapist will explain to you how they work.
Yeah.
You know, because you could end up in psychodynamic therapy,
Yeah.
which has their own approach, might not be suitable for an anxiety disorder. Whereas you might end up with CBT when actually you're going through a bit of grief, and I wouldn't say that's appropriate for grief.
Yeah.
Each modality can be different, but once you find the right therapist you get along with, and their modality of expertise aligns, magic happens.
So how can people, is it again about doing your research and understanding a little bit about these different modalities of therapy and then finding a therapist who will do that?
I always recommend that. Yeah, it's not very commonly said. You know, when you go, if you're going through, you know, you go to your doctor usually, and say you go to your doctor for anxiety. I mean, you'll know this, Zoe. You know, here's some. The recommendation is 6 to 12 sessions of IAPT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and an SSRI, and for many people that is therapy. I tried therapy, didn't work, and for me, a lot of the time, that's, you know, it's like
it's a taster, isn't it?
It's a taster of a small modality of a profession that's got loads of helpful things. It's like saying, don't like sport when all you've played is lawn bowls.
Yeah.
Not bashing lawn bowls, but you know what I mean. It doesn't represent all sport.
And what about the self-help piece? Because I know more than ever now there are apps, there are websites, even, you know, when they're referred on the NHS to IAPT, then the first thing they might be offered is a self-help program. What are your views on that?
Yeah, self-help's good if it speaks to you, and it's appropriate for what you're going through. I mean, if you're struggling with anxiety disorders, I love self-help. That's why I write self-help books.
Yeah.
Not jargon-free, and speaking to the person and helping that person feel seen. But it depends what your issue is, what you're going through therapy. Maybe you're anxious because you lost someone. Self-help book.
No.
Here's a self-help book on grief.
Yeah.
Page 5, cry. Oh, great. No, grief is processed beautifully when you it's shared with in a space where someone's listening.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say you could self-help you out of that.
Yeah.
But depending on what the issue is, I like self-help. Good self-help anyway.
Yeah.
Never lose your constructively critical lens when you're picking up self-help as well, because there's some great stuff out there and there's some naff stuff.
I think I love what you've done there is you've empowered the person, the patient, the client, the person who's experiencing anxiety, empowered them that they do have a choice when it comes to their therapist. Because I know through my experience as a GP, I've seen so many patients who, when we have the conversation about therapy, they will say, nah, tried that once, didn't like the person, we didn't get on, never doing it again. And actually there is something about a pairing of the therapist and the person having therapy that it doesn't always work, does it? Because at the end of the day, it's two human beings. We're not always compatible.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's so important. And that's the thing. And in certain structures, you're paired with someone and rush through, and there's no connection. If there's no connection between a client and a therapist, if you don't feel safe and understood and heard, it won't work, no matter what you talk about in there. It's not a thing you do. It's not like taking your car to the garage and getting, the oil changed. No, it all lies in that therapeutic connection. Yeah. Something I try to do with my clients. And I'm not going to be everyone's cup of tea either. So some people come to me and are like, doesn't really work. Don't like your haircut or and everything you stand for. Whereas some people are like, I really like working. The connection is really important. Yeah.
Right, well, we are running out of time, so let's see how many quick fire questions we can squeeze into this last bit. So I don't know if my problem is serious enough to need therapy. How do I know?
One of the biggest misconceptions about therapy is you go and you people believe you go when you're rock bottom.
Yeah.
Go to therapy whenever. I would
Yeah.
drag every one of my friends and family members and kick them through therapy if I could.
Yeah.
But it has to be their choice. Don't think it's something that you go when you're rock bottom. Be preventative. And your voices and emotions matter.
So probably for this person, the fact that you're asking the question means that it is serious enough.
Yeah, give yourself permission. Do something for yourself. It's okay.
Yeah. Okay. I've been prescribed anxiety medication, but I'm concerned about the side effects. Can I stop taking it once I have started?
You have to have that conversation with your doctor or psychiatrist. Never just immediately stop. You have to have that conversation with them. But if you'd like to come off them and taper off them, then have that conversation.
Yeah,
You can.
I think that's absolutely right. Don't just stop by yourself. Get the help. It might be that a switch is better or that you need to come off them gradually. But of course,
just stop.
You can come off them, but don't do it by yourself. How do I switch off? How do I switch off intrusive thoughts?
You don't. You stop giving them attention, they'll go away. I've tried this for many years. You don't think about it. Stop. The biggest compulsion with intrusive thoughts is rumination. So just allow the thoughts to be there. Don't thought stop. Thought stopping doesn't exist. In fact, it's counterproductive.
It's like don't think about a pink elephant, and you
exactly.
do.
You can't do it. Yeah, and there's all that old school psych stuff that's been disproven about slap an elastic band. Oh gosh, no, you're actually reinforcing it. No, you allow it to be there. I'm willfully tolerating this intrusive thought, but I'm not going to ruminate on it. It can pop in, it can leave. It can pop in, it can leave. It can come with me in the car. It's not sitting up front and messing with the dials. It's sitting in the back. But I'm not going to resist it.
Is there something about calling it out for what it is as well? Like, I recognise that. That's an intrusive thought.
Hello, you again.
Yeah, hello, you again.
It's no more important than any other thought. Just sometimes the anxiety will convince you it is because the threat response is going, is this a threat?
And the fact that I'm having that horrible thought doesn't make me a bad person. It's just that's what my imagination has conjured up this time.
Oh, absolutely. And the reason why it feels important because the threat response is signalling to you that this could be important because it usually goes against your morals and values. It's always a shocker.
Yeah.
Hence why it's called intrusive.
Okay. We've run out of time, but thank you so much, Josh. I mean, there was so much in there that I'm sure many people watching this will take away, and actually so much that I will take away myself. So thank you. And thank you for joining us as well today. I hope that you've learned something that you can take away that will help you when you're feeling anxious or if you're trying to help a loved one. A recording of today's event will be sent out to you on email, so do look out for that as well. There's more help with anxiety on Bupa's website. So for Bupa customers, you can also get support with mindfulness and meditation in the wellbeing section of your My Bupa app. Thanks again, Josh, for amazing advice, and I'll see you next time.